And then there are the reptilians that you people have heard about, and they get really bad press, but they shouldn't.
Danny Sheehan è un avvocato americano noto per il suo lavoro in casi legali ad alto profilo, spesso legati a diritti civili, libertà civili e questioni ambientali. Danny Sheehan è nato nel 1945 a Glen Falls, New York. Ha studiato all'Harvard College, dove si è laureato con lode nel 1967. Successivamente ha frequentato la Harvard Law School, ottenendo una laurea in giurisprudenza. Danny Sheehan ha intrapreso studi religiosi presso la Harvard Divinity School, dove ha approfondito la teologia, la filosofia della religione e l'etica. Questi studi religiosi hanno avuto un impatto significativo sulla sua carriera legale, influenzando il suo impegno per la giustizia sociale, l'etica e i diritti civili. Durante i suoi studi, Sheehan è stato influenzato anche dalla filosofia e dagli insegnamenti dei gesuiti. I gesuiti, noti per il loro impegno nell'istruzione e nella giustizia sociale, hanno rafforzato la sua visione etica e morale del diritto. Questo si riflette nel suo lavoro con il Christic Institute, cofondato da Sheehan, che prende il nome da Cristo come simbolo di giustizia a difesa degli oppressi. Daniel Sheehan rimane una figura influente nel campo del diritto pubblico e dei diritti civili. Negli ultimi anni Sheehan è attivamente coinvolto come avvocato e consulente legale per Lue Elizondo e altri whistleblower. Il suo lavoro in questo ambito si concentra principalmente sulla trasparenza governativa e sui diritti del whistleblower, che cercano di rivelare informazioni rilevanti al pubblico. Ha rappresentato John Mack di fronte al comitato di Harvard per rivedere il suo lavoro. Mack è lo psicologo di Harvard che ha studiato gli effetti dei casi di rapimento alieno, noto per aver intervistato i testimoni dell'evento UFO della scuola di Ariel nello Zimbabwe, dove i bambini della scuola hanno visto un UFO atterrare vicino alla loro scuola e gli alieni uscire dal velivolo. Sheehan è stato molto attivo durante la disclosure del 2013, ma riguardo a questa disclosure è attivo in pubblico solo dal 2024 e da alcuni mesi è presente in molteplici podcast e canali YouTube. È molto trasparente, diretto e soprattutto, essendo avvocato, deve rispettare il codice deontologico, che tra le altre cose gli vieta di mentire. Ovviamente non è da solo, ma ha un team di 18 avvocati.
That we have about 18 lawyers that are working with us at the New Paradigm Institute. They're being trained in detail on how to represent potential whistleblowers at all levels.
Siamo a giugno 2024 e ad oggi lo consideriamo il miglior divulgatore sia per le conoscenze che per la trasparenza, oltre che per la sua posizione molto equilibrata. In questo e nei prossimi episodi approfondiremo tutte le dichiarazioni più rilevanti che ha espresso Daniel Sheehan come divulgatore e attivista pro-disclosure e cercheremo meglio di capire il ruolo dei gesuiti.
Back in November of 1976, immediately after President Carter was elected, and he reached out to the head of the CIA, George Bush Sr., and demanded access to the UFO information and was denied that information. What President Carter did was he went to the House of Representatives, to the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Representatives, and had them contact the Congressional Research Service and have them conduct a special investigation and research on the question of UFOs and their potential relationship to extraterrestrial intelligence. And I was contacted right away once that study began by Dr. Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, and was asked to serve as special counsel to that investigation, primarily because I was legal counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in their National Social Ministry Office at the time. And she thought that, correctly, that I would have a much better chance of getting access to the Vatican archives to see if we could get the information from the Vatican archives to share with President Carter. And so I was in that capacity, and in that capacity, I was, it turns out, was given access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And those files were brought into Washington. They brought them to the Madison building, the new extension at that time in the spring of 1977, that no one was even in the building. It was brand new. And so I was one of the first ones in to the building after it was constructed, and that was where they brought the files. And so I went into there to be shown these files, and in searching through the files, I discovered photographs of active UFO crash retrieval operations, and I could see them. And here was this absolutely transparently obvious UFO, complete saucer, 30, 40 feet wide, a big dome on the top of it that had skidded across this snow-covered field and lodged in the side of this big embankment. And you could see U.S. Air Force personnel all around it, taking photographs of it, and they had a movie camera with two little pods on the top of it. Those little canisters, so this is like in the mid-50s or something. And so once I saw that, I said, wow, this is, and I could see that there were these unique symbols, like along the bottom of the dome of this. And so I actually physically traced these into a yellow pad that I had, and brought it back to Jesuit headquarters. And when I showed it to my Jesuit superiors, that one of them, Father William J. Davis, actually was my superior at the time, and I was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood at the time. He reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope and handed it to me, which had a photograph of a UFO in it. I mean, a 8.5 by 11 glossy black and white photograph. And I asked him where he got it, and he said that his sister Dodie gave it to him. And I said, well, where did she get it? He said, well, her husband Mike is the air traffic controller at the Seattle airport, and one of his best friends is a commercial pilot that flies freight all around the Northwest. He took this photograph out of the window of his airplane, and he didn't want to get in trouble. And so the pilot, once he got it developed and saw what he had, he didn't want to report it for fear they might take his license away. And so he brought it to his friend, who was the head of the air traffic controllers in Seattle. And then Mike didn't want to get in trouble, so he brought it home to his wife, Dodie. And he said, here, Dode, give this to your brother. He's a priest. But I don't believe that Stephen Greer, on the one hand, and Lou Elizondo represent the antipodes of this particular debate. What I disagree with Stephen on, and have, is that I don't believe that the national security state people, as nefarious as they are, and I might add that I'm much more aware of their nefariousness than possibly Stephen is, even because I've dealt with them, for 50 years. That I don't believe that they're going to try to fabricate a false flag attack. I don't believe that they're going to take some of these back-engineered craft and pretend that they're invading us as an alien species so that they can maintain their control over the national security state and get endless funding for a new round of weapons to fight off the aliens. I don't believe that that's happening. On the other hand, he does assert, as you saw, that they're all friendly. They're going to be really helping us. They're all here to help us. They're just waiting for us to qualify to be citizens of the Galactic Federation and all that. I think that's a little bit Pollyanna-ish. But with regard to Lou, whom I know very well, it isn't that he is saying that the alien civilization actually constitutes an actual military threat to us. What it is that the national security state people believe that if they're not in complete control to establish full spectrum dominance and control militarily of the field of battle, they view anything that threatens that as a national security threat, because they conflate national security with their complete dominance. Okay? They got UFOs coming down in Montana and shutting off all 10 of the Minuteman nuclear missiles, just shutting them down. And the aircraft carriers, the undersea UFOs coming up and shutting down an entire nuclear aircraft carrier, cutting off all of its communications. It's laying there dead in the water, for an hour without any capacity to communicate with anybody. Now people who are trained their entire life to be military people, that makes their hair stand on end, and they say, oh, this is the worst kind of threat we can possibly imagine. But it's not. The extraterrestrial civilization has not, in fact, demonstrated that they want to seize control of our planet, to come in and raid our resources, any of those traditional colonial type things. That none of that is true. And that isn't what Lou means when he's talking about there being a potential national security threat. He's talking about that former perception that it's over matching our technology, and so therefore we view it as a threat. And then he told me about his commander after he had spent years being in Project Blue Book and got to be the kind of part of the fixtures there at Project Blue Book, dealing with those cases which Project Blue Book could not explain away, even though they had characterized all kinds of very real sightings as, swamp gas or mistaken birds or mistaking Venus as, but there were over 700 of these cases where they were absolutely unable to deny the fact that dozens of people had seen them, that there were photographs of them, etc. He was in that group. And his commander, finally, years into the program, brought this man with him to S4 out by Area 51. And he described the details of what the place was like, which was confirmed by lots of other information I knew, and that he was actually brought down into a facility at S4 where there was a live ET, EB, the extra biological specimen. And it was, an entity. It was like 6 feet tall, a very benign, but it was in this room and this guy was afraid of him. He said, I thought he was like demonic. Well, it turns out that this guy was a real fundamentalist Christian, and thought that this was completely unacceptable. Didn't want to go near him, but he could see him through this double mirror that his commander went in and was having telepathic engagement with this being. And this other fellow stayed outside. But he had military personnel that were there, and that they showed him these 3.5 by 5 index cards that they had taken notes from telepathic interviews with this particular being. And so I was convinced that, it's absolutely impossible to think that they're going to be conducting telepathic interviews with this being and they don't film them. That's just not going to happen. And it wasn't that this man said, oh, yes, and I saw the people filming him. That he didn't say that. But I knew positively that with his commander right there having a face-to-face encounter with this being, and the fact that they had records of his extensive interviews in the cards, that they had to have a film of this. That's what I said, actually, when people asked me about it. And interestingly, this man was allowed to read through the index cards because he wouldn't go into the room with it. He stayed outside. And so they said, here are some of the cards of the things he's been saying. And one of the things that the being was saying is that he was part of a group that had been put together, and there were beings from different star systems that were all part of this same organization, and that they were tasked to be going around inside our galaxy to where planets had generated life, to try to get an evaluation of what stage they were at, how they were doing, etc. And the interviewers, at least per what was said in the cards, had said, well, who is it that's in charge of this project that you're talking about? And he said, well, it's like what you people would tend to think of as God, but it's a lot different. That's what he said. And then this guy, because he was such a fundamentalist, he said, I wasn't going to tell anybody about that because I didn't believe him. I thought he was demonic and I thought he was lying about it. And so I never reported it to anybody. But he wanted to tell me this on his deathbed. And so that's why I said that, that I'm convinced that there has to be film footage of the interviews with this being.
Can you kind of list what these other species, as to the best of your knowledge, what is actually visiting us here? What's interacting with us?
The one species that is the most well known, of course, is what they call the small grays. These are like 3.5 feet tall, small, with large heads, oval shaped eyes.
The classic alien,
three fingers, the classic little alien. But there's also a tall gray species that is virtually the same people, but they're like 5 to 6 feet tall. They'll look you right straight in the eye. You don't have to scooch to have any contact with them. They're right up in your face. And then there is the reptilians, and it's important that the reptilians get this really bad rap. That people say, oh, it was like a reptile, it's like a lizard or snake, but they're more like the little insurance gecko guy, but they're big, they're tall, they're like 6 feet tall, but they're actually quite benign, very friendly, kind of affectionate. That Barbara Lamb, for example, who's one of the preeminent psychiatrists in the field, that has conducted literally hundreds of interviews with people who have had encounters with different beings. She was wanting, after many years and decades indeed of interviewing people about this and trying to assist them with the kind of trauma that these encounters kind of generate sometimes, that she actually wanted so much to really get to see one of these so that she could actually know positively that they're real. And she told the story, one afternoon, she comes back from her garden and she comes into her house, and there is one of the reptile species standing in her living room, and he was very mellow, very friendly, kept communicating to her telepathically, look, everything's fine, don't worry. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were real and that we're kind. And she was just extraordinarily happy to get to have that happen. There's this other assertion that there are these very human-looking like species that are in fact our ancestors. This is the Billy Meyer trope about this species, and then there's an additional one, a fifth one, which they call the mantis people. These are extremely tall, 7 feet tall, extremely thin. Almost mantis, like praying mantises, very tall, kind of a little scooched over. Really, very interestingly, whenever there's a sighting of any of the mantis people, if they're in the company of any of these other species, all the other species seem to sort of acknowledge that the mantis people are the ones in charge. That are the ones that are kind of giving directions to the others and coordinating them, etc. So there are five of these species, that there are multiple reports, highly credible people, police officers, military officials, doctors, lawyers, candlestick makers, butchers and bakers, all across the world that have had these kind of encounters. And those are the ones that are the most prominent. Now, there are assertions that there are many others, but from the point of view of the New Paradigm Institute, at this point, we're not as convinced that some of those other stories are accurate. But we believe that there are these five that are coming and going from our planet and have had multiple sightings and multiple contacts, direct contacts with these beings, all of whom communicate telepathically. Some people say, oh, they say there's 157 species or there's 1,000 different kind of species. Well, clearly inside the entire galaxy, that you're going to have a large number of planets with different species of extraterrestrial intelligence. But those that are repeatedly referenced here that are coming are obviously the small grays, that everybody, when you ask a kindergartner in the country now to draw an ET person, they'll draw that person. They'll draw the little short 3.5 foot tall, ET with a large head and the big dark eyes and the little holes for nose. They'll do it. Okay. And then there is the tall grays, and these are like, 5.5 to 6 feet tall people that are look like grown-up grays. And so that there's the tall grays as well. And then there are the reptilians that people have heard about, and they get really bad press, but they shouldn't. I think it's just because people human beings have this kind of recoiling from serpents and dangerous poisonous snakes and things. And so that there's this kind of adverse reaction to reptiles. But the fact is that we have numerous accounts of extraordinarily cordial, positive encounters between human beings and these reptilian beings, and that they give off very positive, friendly vibes. And it's just that we kind of recoil cellularly from these beings. But it's important for people to remember that we came through that process. The whole evolution of life on our planet, Homo sapiens came through that process, and repeat the process in the womb, of actually having a stage of the zygote for each one of us that was in this kind of reptilian form, with the gills and the tail and the living in a liquid ambience, I mean that, so that we will be able to get people past this kind of bad press that's been generated about them, and people like David Icke and others have gone off on tangents of picking up on these mythologies. Oh, that they're from Zeta Reticuli and they're the reptilians and they're in some kind of pitched battle with the good white people that look like Aryan human beings that are from the Pleiades, and they've latched on. The Scientologists have done the same thing. They've locked onto that kind of a mythos, but I don't credit that. I think that the reptilian people from another star system are just as entitled to respect and openness to cordial relations as any of the others. And then there is, of course, the big, tall, what they call mantis types. That they consider, they look like, they remind people of praying mantis. And they say it over and over again. People who've had no contact with each other, have had no kind of a history of knowing anything about this, they keep thinking that when they're asked, like, what do they look like? They always keep using these reps. They look like a praying mantis. They're big, huge, tall, like 7 feet tall, extremely skinny, but they've all got the 3 fingers, and that they're, and the extraordinary thing is these are all like bipeds. These are bipeds, and they've got arms and hands and head and torsos. I mean, it's extraordinary. This particular group of UFO people that have been encountering our human beings come within this fairly tight group. And any of the other assertions of any other species are kind of outliers. And there's this other one which I find to be very problematic. This thing about these tall, Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed human beings from the Pleiades. I mean, that's it seems to me almost to be a little bit of a bridge too far. It's this kind of desperate attempt to suggest that we're them or they're us, out there, and that therefore, we don't have to come to grips with the kind of cellular recoil that we have, built in. That, I mean, people talk big all the time, but I can tell you from what I've talked to lots and lots of people, no matter how confident they are that they're going to be cool when this happens, when they actually come face to face with an extraterrestrial being, their entire cellular structure that's been generated over billions of years and tens of thousands of years of human evolution instantaneously recoil, and the people are afraid. And so that one of the things that Dr. John Mack and I were doing back before John was accidentally killed in 2004, what we were doing is, he was doing it primarily, is training people who were repeated contactees to do holotropic breathing. So the minute that they thought they were going to get ready to have another one of these encounters that's frightened them, is that they would do the deep holotropic breathing, and that they would get calmed and centered, so that when the beings appeared, they would be centered and calm, and could actually have communication with them. And that we were actually in the process of providing questions to them. We were kind of, John and I were trying to develop at the New Paradigm Institute that we were trying to establish up at in Cambridge, that they would actually be like an ambassador corps, that could actually ask questions so that we could start getting some inside information about the cultures and stuff of the people. But that's what we were engaged in when John was accidentally killed in London back in 2004. It's important to realize that religion, the Latin root of the English word religion is relegare, which is to relink. That's what that means literally in the Latin. And so that the entire endeavor of religion among our human family is to try to relink us back into unity with the infinite and eternal consciousness that is the ultimate source of the generation of the material universe that we experience ourselves as being in. And so it's important that the religious institutions, in the hierarchy in the religious institutions, has been keeping secret from the people information which they thought regular people wouldn't understand or couldn't understand. For example, in the Catholic Church, the entire cartography of the belief system of the Catholic Church, was formulated back at a time when 99% of the people in the whole world were completely illiterate. And that 99% of the people never went more than 50 miles away from the place where they were born. And so that as a group of people that were able to experience these higher capabilities of our human family, began to share the information with each other, we're trying to figure out a way to communicate at least something about this information to the masses of people who were completely illiterate and uneducated and unsophisticated and didn't have any kind of contact with the rest of the world. And so what they did is they provided stories. They came up with mythologies and fictionalized accounts of something at a very simple level to try to communicate to people about. And the problem is that that's become ossified, and kind of poured into concrete, those kind of childlike mythologies that they were promulgating. And then the institution adopted them and then started becoming totally protective of the literal truthfulness of those kind of low-level understandings of what it is that's going on. And so that's what's happened. But the Catholic Church and the other major traditions, the Hindu and the Buddhist and Sufi traditions, etc., are knowledgeable about this. And there are writings, secret writings and things that talk about the actual capabilities of our human family, etc., and how it relates to this, and what it's ultimately saying based upon my review of this. And it's one of the reasons that I went back to Harvard to do the master's work and plan to do the regular PhD work on this, is I was trying to understand this in kind of the most sophisticated level, so I could try to figure out how we can get a more modern story conveyed to people who now are not illiterate and not ignorant and are familiar with things going on in the world. And so that what we've really discovered here, and this is part of what we'll be trying to communicate to people through the New Paradigm Institute, what the new paradigm is to understand. And what's really being told to us is that the sum total of all of the mass and energy that we see in the kind of pursuant to the classic Newtonian Cartesian materialist worldview, the sum total of mass and energy that makes up our material universe. The question you have to ask is, well, what's outside of that? If we have a finite universe, and we're all in the process right now with the Webb telescope and the Planck telescope and everything, trying to figure out where the boundaries are of our material universe, that's been allegedly expanding outward from the original Big Bang and is expanding and disintegrating out wider and wider. Where are the actual boundaries of this material universe? And once you ascertain the boundaries, what's outside of that? Okay. And what the word is that there is an infinite, infinite, and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness. And it was this infinite and eternal sea of consciousness that basically enfolded into manifestation, into material condensation, an aspect of that consciousness that was the original inchoate quantum field that was able to flash into material manifestation in 1 microsecond as a wave of energy and then disappear out of material manifestation. And then the next one would flash into material manifestation as a particle of mass. And that it underwent this process of mitosis that kind of just multiplies itself and multiplies itself until there was the critical mass of the universe that existed. And people have heard the story about it, but they don't understand it, is that, this total sum total of all the mass and energy that existed in the form of inchoate quantum fields was no bigger than the head of a pin. It was so deeply condensed, and that every single unit was in direct contact with each other. And then what happened is the polarity that was holding them all together, the bonding phenomenon that was holding them all together in contact with each other, immediately reversed. And every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter, pushed away from every other one. And that was the nature of the Big Bang. It wasn't an explosion from a single point outward. It was everything pushing itself away from everything else until the next microsecond when the bonding phenomenon reestablished itself. And so there was a combined force of pushing everything out and away from each other. But at the same time, there was reinstituted this kind of attraction that it all had for each other. And so they started coming together to form, atomic units. It would form muons and leptons in these subparticles of matter that would then end up being electrons and protons and neutrons that would come together to form an actual unit of an element. And the elements would join together to be compounds and mixtures, and then eventually star systems and galaxies. But we know that what's happening is every single element in the entire universe, as far as we can tell from what we've studied so far, is disintegrating. It's got an atomic life, and it disintegrates, the half-life, that half of the units of atoms of a given element will disintegrate and break down into the lower constituent elements. And that this expansion and disintegration process is going on, that we believe that we're in the process of an expansive activity going on in our universe, so that every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe will eventually be separate and apart from every other one. And our entire material universe will disintegrate. And it will ascend back into a state of ultimate and infinite consciousness. But then at the next instant, it'll go the process, so that there's this whole oscillation that's going on and it will begin to come back together again as a material universe until it collapses back down into this little size of a head of a pin. This is the oscillating cosmos. This is the what they call the magna manus, is the great year cycle of our universe. And that in each expansion and each period of contraction, there comes together a certain confluence of mass and energy in which the units of matter become more and more complex, and the limited minimal amount of every single unit of matter ultimately is conscious, because it is consciousness. It's condensed consciousness, and that's what they're talking about. And that it isn't that quote God is some human being, sitting on a throne, with a long white beard and a scepter. That's that primitive, kind of mythology image that was created. But the beings, human beings who know about this, know what the configuration really is. And there are all kinds of texts in Hindu and in Islam and in Christianity that talk about these things, but they've kept them secret. Because it's like casting pearl before swine, as they say. But the fact of the matter is, the time has come to stop treating us like swine, or treating us like mushrooms, as they say, keeping us in the dark and feeding us shit.